I've seen people sitting on sidewalk cafes drinking beers. People are lined up at payphones to try to reach their relatives, but we're not seeing anybody who seems out of sorts. We're monitoring, Rich and I, the radio traffic here. We're hearing city officials say that they are all gathering at City Hall. They have activated the Emergency Command Center, which is in Brooklyn, outside of Manhattan. That has been activated, but city officials are all convening at City Hall to brief the mayor and to ensure continuity of government. We're hearing numerous reports on these radios of people trapped in elevators in buildings. As you might imagine, that's natural when you have a massive power outage. There's also no subway service. The lights are all out, so people have had to be evacuated from subway stations underground. We have a massive logistical nightmare here, Seth.
Are you on a cell phone, Dan? I ask because there had been a report before that the cell phones were not working in Manhattan.
The cell phones were not working for quite some time. I was getting paid by our news desk quite aggressively for a while, so that was working, but it was very frustrating. I could not use the cell phone. We had two cell phones here in the car, both on different systems, providers, and neither of them was working. We stopped and asked a very nice New York citizen on the side of the road if we could borrow her cell phone, and she very kindly let us try that as well, which is on a third system, and that wasn't working either. It took several calls to California for me to get connected, and then finally I got through to New York.
Now, wait a second. So you're talking to me via California, or did you finally get through New York to New York?
I got through to California. They were going to try to connect me. That didn't work. And then finally, some stroke of luck, I was able to get through to New York, who then connected me to you. It has been a frustrating and roundabout experience, to say the least. Let me just reiterate, as I look out here at the sidewalks of people outside of their offices, despite the fact that almost exactly 2 years ago, this is a city that endured a massive terror attack, and where people are quite reasonably afraid of a recurrence of such an event, there is a real notable lack of panic and fear here. I think people are concerned, but I think they understand that there doesn't seem to be any imminent danger, and as evidenced by this incident with the woman letting us borrow her cell phone on the side of the street, there is a sort of an atmosphere of collegiality.
Yeah, I think you're very wise to emphasize that again, and let me underscore that by saying that both the federal government and Mayor Bloomberg, representing the city government of New York City, have stressed that this does not appear to be the consequence of any terrorist action. There seems to have been some sort of a natural breakdown, whether it was a spontaneous fire or how that ignited is not altogether clear. But just to bring everyone up to speed, and Dan, stay with me because I'd like you to draw kind of a word picture of what is happening in terms of traffic in the street if all the traffic lights are out. But if you have just joined us, you should know that there has been a massive power outage throughout much of the Northeast, both of the United States and of Canada. There are massive power outages in New York, in Hartford, Connecticut, in Detroit, in Cleveland, in Syracuse, New York, and also massive outages in Toronto and Ottawa. And my colleague Dan Harris is in the mid-60s on the east side of New York City. You were saying, Dan, before that the traffic lights are out, so who's controlling traffic and how well is it working?
Well, not working really well. I'm watching a citizen here stopping traffic at this intersection on 2nd Avenue, allowing crosstown traffic to proceed as downtown traffic stops. It reminds me actually of the days after the fall of Baghdad when there was no traffic lights and there were citizens on the street as well directing traffic on a freelance basis. And it seems actually, I have to say, to be working reasonably well at this early juncture. Nobody's moving anywhere quickly, but we are actually starting to move a little bit faster than we were, say, 10 minutes ago. Worth noting that everyone is dealing with this. There are city officials who are we're being stopped by this citizen as I speak. It's quite an interesting situation. But there are city officials who are also stuck on the Brooklyn Bridge as they try to get into the city to help brief the mayor who is trying to maintain control in this awkward and unusual situation. I can add one thing to what you're saying about the genesis of this problem. What we're hearing on the radios is that there was some sort of incident in Ontario, Canada, at a power station, and we heard the mayor talk about this as well on the radio, and that has spilled or cascaded southward. So that apparently is the source of this problem. It's not very, very specific at this point, but there's something that happened in Canada that's causing this massive outage in the Northeast. And we're hearing that emergency command centers have been activated in many, if not all, of the Northeast cities at this point. That comes from Rich Esposito, who's with me in this car as we head south here in Manhattan towards City Hall.
Yeah, Dan, I don't know if any of this is manageable, but if you happen to pass a subway station, if there was some way that you could just run down the stairs and take a look and see what's happening with the subway system itself, or do you know from having spoken to people, I have reported that the subway system is down. That's what I've seen on the wires. That's what I've been hearing, but I haven't heard it firsthand from anyone.
I haven't seen it firsthand, but I have heard it firsthand on the radio that the subway system is down and that people have been asked to leave, in fact, probably just left of their own volition because that's what common sense would dictate. Again, I continue to watch this freelance New Yorker, Saul Shapiro is his name, who is directing traffic here on the corner of 66th Street and 2nd Avenue, and people, to their credit, I guess, are obeying him. It's quite an interesting scene here.
Well, if you can find out, the only reason I'm particularly concerned about the subways is in 1965, some 90,000 people were trapped in trains that were caught between stations. If there is some way that you can, in a few minutes or so, give us an update on what's happening under the streets of New York today, that would be very helpful indeed. But Dan, why don't you keep going, and we'll talk to you a little bit later. Professor Gross, are you still with me?
Still with you, sir.
I have been hearing that there is some sort of an outage in Ontario that may have had, or some sort of a problem in Ontario that may have been the precipitating cause of everything that's happening on the rest of the East Coast. Does that make sense to you?
Any of those places could be possible. As I'm waiting for you, I was looking at the website. There's nothing available that would be, say, for the power industry that I could access. So the first thing I heard was Niagara Mohawk, and all of those systems are interconnected. So when you have a very strongly interconnected network, it doesn't matter which part you hit; it's equally affected because of the high speed with which the electricity travels.
Just give us a shopping list, if you would, of what, I mean, from your own knowledge, you know is going to be affected. For example, in New York, the subways are affected. Traffic lights are affected.
Well, one of the things that we see, and this is going to be, again, a very good lesson. In Montreal, about 3 years ago, they had that terrible ice storm.
Yes.
And people were reporting that it feels exactly like Sarajevo, but there was no shooting. Everything that we do today depends on electricity. And consequently, the subways, you have people stuck in elevators. You have people who cannot do any banking. We have all the grocery stores affected because the food is going bad. We have all the communications to some extent impacted. So everything that we do is impacted by the fact that we don't have electricity. It's lucky in terms of the traffic that it's during the day, but what's happening is that even though it is during the day, you can see that the traffic is terrible. I can see that on my television.
Yeah, and I mean, you're making an excellent point, and that is within a couple of hours, dusk is going to fall, it's going to start getting dark, and that's when it really will become problematic. Let me, if you can spare us the time, Professor Gross, ask you to hang on. My old friend and colleague Peter Jennings is on vacation outside Ottawa and is on a phone with us now. Peter, what can you report from up there in your former homeland?
Well, Ted, I can tell you, first of all, that Ottawa is completely without power now, the Canadian capital. And there were a couple of references by one of your last interview about a power outage may have been caused in Canada. There's some first-hand reports from Hamilton, Ontario, west of Toronto, that there may have been a fire in some of the power lines across what's called the Burlington Skyway, bringing power to the east from the Niagara Falls Power Hydroelectric project there. Ontario power appears to be out from Ottawa here in the east, which is on the Ontario-Quebec border, all the way to Windsor on the border with Michigan. All been treated fairly casually so far in Ottawa. There's 4 or 5 hours left of sunlight, but people are still getting out of work at the moment. And the local radio stations are all on full time with what is clearly happening to traffic in many places. But Ottawa, parts of Toronto, Windsor, Ontario, but in Quebec, just across the river from Ottawa, there is complete power. It coming, I think, from the Quebec grid up around Hudson's Bay rather than from the Niagara Peninsula.
Yeah, all of that is consistent, Peter, with what we've been hearing. Windsor, of course, just across the river from Detroit, and the power is out in Detroit and in Cleveland. What are you seeing? I mean, Dan Harris was just talking about the relatively casual and phlegmatic way that New Yorkers are taking what is happening so far. How about up there? Where are you exactly?
I'm actually on a farm just outside Ottawa, so I'm seeing very little.
I guess it's kind of quiet out there, yeah.
It's very quiet in terms of the power itself, but it is very interesting how casual the radio commentary has been on both the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and on the local private station here. People have been concerned about getting home, worried about traffic. The cops have asked people to take public transportation rather than their own cars. But about every second caller to the radio station worries about the beer or the steaks in their fridge. The financial markets have all closed here as well, so there was no disruption there. But as your previous interview said, everything runs on electricity up here, so undoubtedly there are people trapped in elevators, or the local radio station hasn't mentioned it as yet.
Yeah, I was about to say, on the good news side of the ledger, people seem to be responding very calmly. This does not appear to be the result of any terrorist activity. On the negative side of the ledger, we are only just beginning, indeed have barely begun, to get reports from some of those people who may be trapped in elevators, who may be trapped in subway trains that are caught between two stations. And of course, once dark falls, one of the things that almost inevitably happens, and we can only hope and pray that it does not happen this time, is that people take advantage of the darkness then for looting. So the tough times, the tough hours are still lying ahead of us, but at the moment, and I've been looking at pictures here of downtown Manhattan, and it is absolutely jammed with people on the streets, even though there is still some traffic trying to make its way through the city of New York. But that is being replicated all over the Northeast. Once again, New York, Detroit, Cleveland, Syracuse, Hartford, Connecticut, Toronto, Canada, and Ottawa. It may be some time before power is restored. Peter, anything else you want to add before we let you go back to vacation?
By the looks of what we're seeing in downtown Ottawa, you have a vastly greater challenge in New York. So I'll leave you with that.
All right, Peter, thank you very much indeed. I understand we've got Karen Chase over at Lincoln Center. Karen, what can you add to the sum of our knowledge?
Well, Ted, I understand you've been concerned about people stuck in the subways, and I am just outside the Lincoln Center subway where people were just pouring out from the staircase with a combination of fear and relief etched on their faces. Many of them told of the harrowing moments when the subway cars went silent, dark, and motionless, and they waited for transit officials to rescue them, and how they were guided across some tracks and to relative safety. And keep in mind,
I'm sorry. Let me just ask
that.
Hold on 1 second. I've got someone who's been babbling away in my ear here, so I haven't been able to hear what you've been telling me, Karen, and I really do want to know what is going on in the subways. What are people telling you as they come up from the subways?
Well, they talk about how the harrowing moments when the subway cars went silent, dark, and motionless, and they waited for transit officials with flashlights to rescue them, and how they were guided across the tracks and their long, dark walk to safety. Again, they emerged from the subway with a combination of fear and relief on their faces. Many of them were soaked in sweat because, as you know, it's probably about 10 to 20 degrees warmer down there than it is on the street, and it's a very hot day here in New York. I should also mention that the streets here are packed with people, many with cell phones, many with concerned looks on their faces because cell phone service is spotty at best. And cars are moving in fits and starts because, of course, the traffic lights are not working. Choppers are hovering above. Police and fire vehicles are intermittently screaming down the streets. But there is not a sense of panic. There is a sense of orderly wanting to go home, for lack of a better term. Although I did see people rushing into a local fire station asking for help to free people who had been trapped in some elevators.
But I think we can infer from what you've been telling us, Karen, that there are somewhere beneath the streets of New York many thousands of people who are probably have been trapped in trains down there. I gather from what you're telling me that transit authority police are essentially going train to train and escorting people down. But, it's going to depend how far they have to walk. That will depend purely on where the train was when the electricity went out. But you fill in whatever you can on that.
Well, that's true, and I would try to get down to the subway to see what was going on. There's a subway alarm bell that's been ringing relentlessly ever since the power went out. They're not letting people down there because mostly transit officials are trying to get down there to rescue anyone who might be trapped. I should also mention that many of the subway stations are very close together, so that is to the benefit of people that are stuck there. If they do have to be rescued, they probably don't have a horribly long walk, so that's good. And I do see transit officials going down there, making an effort to orderly rescue people.
All right. Well, do what you can, Karen, to talk to those folks. And in particular, I guess the greatest concern is going to be old people or people who have, breathing problems or heart conditions, those kinds of people stuck down there. They're going to have to get them out as best they can. And maybe you can find out how they go about doing that. If there are people who are unable to walk along the tracks for a quarter mile or however far they may have to walk, what do they do with them? How do they get them out? But as soon as you can, get back to us if you will.
Will do.
Okay?
Will do.
All right. Thanks very much. We have, forgive me, Professor Morgan, we have a Professor Grange Morgan on the phone. Would you be good enough to tell me, because I didn't have a chance to jot it down as someone was talking in my ear before, tell me what your area of expertise is and then give us whatever information you can.
I'm Granger Morgan, and I'm co-director of something called the Electricity Industry Center at Carnegie Mellon University. I obviously don't know more than you do about what has specifically happened, but it's the nature of power systems that when you load them very heavily and then you have a fault or two, as it sounds like you had at least one fault in New York this afternoon, these things can propagate through the system and overload other components, so you get propagating blackouts. And the problem has been exacerbated, made worse in the last few years because we haven't been seeing investments in upgrading the transmission system, and so each year we've run a little closer to the edge, and it sounds like finally that lack of attention in upgrading the system has caught up with us.
If something relatively small, and of course we've heard a couple of reports, and if you've been listening for the last 20 minutes or so, you will have heard me say that there was some kind of a fire at the Con Edison plant, at one of the Con Edison plants in New York. Peter Jennings was telling me a few minutes ago that apparently there was some kind of a problem at a plant in Ontario, Canada. Why would a relatively small problem at one of those plants have such a massive effect throughout the rest of the Northeast?
Well, obviously it's not supposed to, but if the system is running right near the edge and you cause a problem, then you can get waves of disruption that's spread out through the system, and that can push other bits of the system over the edge. They can have difficulties, and then those difficulties in turn can propagate and cause other problems as well. So from what I've heard, I can't say for sure that it's one fault that has caused all of this. Indeed, probably no one will know for sure for a while. But the lesson we ought to be drawing from it is that we've been pushing the system too hard in recent years. We've had close calls in places like Chicago in the past, and the basic difficulty is that the system simply doesn't have the capacity right now to meet heavy summer loads. There's one other lesson maybe we ought to draw from it. I heard you talking with folks about traffic lights being out and traffic stalled in the city. There are modern, cheap technologies that could fix that problem. I mean, there's no reason when the power goes out at my house, the laptops and the clocks keep going because they have batteries in them. There are technologies that could do the same thing for traffic lights these days, and so maybe out of all of the chaos, we'll learn a few lessons so that the next time we lose lights, if perhaps even in a less benign situation, say in a terror event, we'll at least have streetlights running so that emergency vehicles can get through.
All right, Professor Morgan, I've got a couple of other questions I'd like to ask you, and I promise I won't keep you hanging on too long, but my colleague Dan Harris is back, and I want to find out what he has discovered over the past 10 minutes or so. So can you stick with us for a couple of minutes?
Sure, no problem.
Thanks very much. Dan, can you hear me all right?
I can, Ted. Hello.
Where are you now?
We are now on 1st Avenue and 65th, really just inching our way downtown as we try to get to City Hall. We're trying to make it over to the highway on the east side. Unable thus far to get close to a subway station to get the flavor of what's going on down there, although Karen James gave you a little bit of it. We are, as I mentioned before, monitoring radio traffic from, among other people, the police department. And as you mentioned before, there is a real serious law enforcement risk and concern here about lawlessness in the absence of power. Though we are not hearing any reports at this point of crime, we have heard some unconfirmed, and I stress unconfirmed, reports of serious car accidents outside of city limits because of the lack of traffic lights. But right now, the main job for the police department is evacuating people from these subway stations where, as you've mentioned, the power has gone down, the trains have stopped, and the lights are out. There are potentially hundreds of thousands of people stuck down there because this is rush hour. The police department also has a problem with their phone lines. Last we heard, their landlines were not working. The only way they can communicate with each other is by radio. And they're also dealing with the same traffic problems that we're dealing with. So if they do have to respond quickly somewhere, they're stuck trying to get through this traffic, which, as I can attest, is no easy task.
Well, I was going to say, Dan, I mean, I think one of the points we need to make, which is sort of self-evident, but at a time like this, I just need to sort of focus a little bit of attention on it, is that a place like downtown Manhattan has hundreds of thousands of people who come there to work. And most of those people do not come by their own transportation. They don't come by car. They'll come by subway. They'll come by train. And the question now is, how are those people going to get home? Have you had any chance to talk to anyone about that?
We haven't, as of yet. We're trying to keep moving. But, I heard Mayor Bloomberg on the radio telling New Yorkers that his advice is to go straight home. And the first question that popped into my mind was, how? It's one thing if you can walk home from your office, but as you say, many people here rely on public transportation. I can tell you the buses are running, but not very quickly. And, of course, the subways are not. So this is going to be a major logistical problem. But
all right,
you raise a good question, and we'll start asking people on the street.
All right, Dan, thanks very much. Let me interrupt you because we have someone who we may hope actually has some solid information. Tony Early is the Chief Executive Officer of Detroit Energy. Mr. Early, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can, Ted.
Do you know what's happening? Do you know why it's happening?
I can tell you what we saw. We saw outages start to occur about an hour ago. It came from the east. We're located in the eastern third of the state of Michigan. The outages appeared to come across Ontario. We're interconnected with Ontario. We serve 2.1 million customers. Currently, our whole system is down right now. Although we do have some of our power plants still running, and we're working through our procedures to restart the system, but that's a process that takes hours. It's not a process you can run through very quickly.
If we could analogize this to some kind of a railway system, what you do if there's an accident on one part of the truck is you sort of shunt the engines around to another part of the track system. Is there any way that you can do that with energy? In other words, if the energy grid is shut down, is there any way of sort of isolating the damaged part and shunting it over to a part that is still undamaged?
Absolutely. And in fact, every utility in what is called the Eastern Interconnection, because the eastern part of the U.S. is all interconnected together. And right now, across the eastern part of the United States, there are utilities working through that process of isolating where there's damage and then starting to bring power back to those areas that are undamaged.
All right. So how long does it take before that kind of a shunt can take place and before we start seeing the power back online again?
Well, it can take from a couple of hours to several hours. I guess the best way to analogize to it was the Northeast blackout of 1965. And there, within a few hours, you started to see some areas come back, and I think it lasted as long as probably 12 hours or more before all the power came back. So it gets brought back in steps, because what you don't want to do is overload the system and cause then outages to occur again. So it'll be a very deliberate process.
This is probably something more for the municipal officials of a city like Detroit or New York or Cleveland, but How do they take care of people who are patients at home, who have, let's say, oxygen that they're using that is operating on electricity and who don't have a backup power system of their own? Is there something, in other words, that immediately goes into effect, emergency procedures that can actually get to that level of specificity around a city?
Well, there are, because in the normal course of business, power outages that are caused by thunderstorms and lightning, you run into the same situation, only now it is more widespread. And so municipalities do have procedures in place. The challenge will be it will probably stress resources because weather-related outages tend to be parts of systems, and they can focus their resources here. It covers the whole system. But I think what the municipalities will be doing is following the existing procedures that they've got.
Give us a sense. I'm sitting down here in Washington, D.C. Our power has not been affected. Philadelphia has not been affected. Is there any way that what is happening in one grid can ultimately bleed over into another?
Well, that would have happened already. In fact, that's exactly what happened because these power outages seem to migrate across the east. Now, the grid is designed to take a certain level of failure. And I think one of the things that will have to be investigated is why it wasn't more geographically isolated. This seems to be a larger geographic area than you might expect. But now that the systems are stabilized, the trick will be making sure that as we bring power back, we don't exacerbate the problem.
Can you just quickly, and then I'll let you know, because I'll let you go, because obviously you have more important things to do than talking to me tonight. But just give us a sense of what the outer perimeters of this grid are, north to south, east to west.
Excuse me, I didn't catch the question.
Give me a sense of what the outer perimeter of this power grid, the one that's been affected by this. In other words, what kind of an area are we talking about, north to south, east to west? That
I can't tell you. We really can only tell you the power systems adjacent to us. We do know that Ontario is out. We do know that Ohio is mixed. There's some outages there. Parts of Ohio do have power. We also know that the western part of the state of Michigan does have power. Those are the systems that I can talk about. Yeah, actually, even as you and I are talking, my colleagues in the control room have put up a map, and we see Ottawa to the northeast, Lansing, Michigan, and Detroit to the west, Cleveland, New York City. So it's a fairly large area, and obviously covers an enormous number of people who are affected by this. But I thank you very much, Mr. Early, for joining us. It was very good of you to take the time. Let me just go over to my ABC News colleague, Jeff Morrell. Jeff, you can give us a little bit of information on what the Federal Aviation Authority has done, because obviously planes in the air, planes that want to take off, what's happening?
Well, Ted, our producers have been on the phone with a number of federal agencies. As you mentioned, first off, the FAA tells us that there are ground stops in effect in Cleveland, all three of the New York airports, Ottawa, and Toronto. What they mean by a ground stop is basically this. If your plane is on the ground and you are scheduled to take off soon, you will not be doing so. You're going to stay on the ground indefinitely. If you are in the air, that is, and need to land at one of those airports, you will be permitted to land. But takeoffs are grounded at this point. We've also heard, Ted, from a couple of other federal agencies which are working on this problem. The Department of Energy was a little bit reluctant to talk to us. They say at this point, which echoes what we've heard from other agencies, that nothing so far indicates terrorism was the cause of this outage. They say they have a team on it right now, are trying to discern the cause. The Department of Homeland Security is also working on this. They say they are in contact with state and local authorities as well as energy companies. And what is interesting here is they say that they are sending out a signal to the network to determine where the disruption occurred. And then they're going to deploy people to the site. They caution that could take some time, and they advise that people pay heed to the advice of local officials. They also say that FEMA is attempting to determine if it is necessary to deploy federal emergency resources to any of the affected sites. So that's what we have at this point from the federal agencies. It sounds as though a lot of people are working on this, and not a lot of people have much to tell us at this point. In fact, I should point out that Homeland Security was very interested in what we knew about this problem. So I think everybody at this point is grappling to find out what exactly is going on here.
Somewhat less than encouraging to hear that. But just tell me, Jeff, who is trying to pinpoint where the problem is? Which agency?
I don't know particularly which agency. The information we have is from the Homeland Security Department is that a signal is being sent out, presumably along the power grid, and they are trying to determine where the disruption occurred. It's unclear if the Department of Homeland Energy or any other federal agencies are doing that. I am unsure at this point, Ted. I forget when they reorganized the government and created this huge entity, Department of Homeland Security, if DOE, the Department of Energy, now falls under Homeland Security. I'm unclear on that at this point.
Yeah, I am too. But we have Professors Gross and Morgan still on the line, both of them experts in this area. So, well, Professor Gross is gone. Professor Morgan, you're still with us. Can you answer that question? When you talk about sending a signal to pinpoint where the problem is, I would imagine it has to be the power company that does that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the power company can. Actually, there are regional control centers, and it's not so much that you send a signal over the power lines. There are